welcome to a deep dive about the International Patient Summary, or IPS. We're calling this a high impact collaboration because we think that we've had great success in our collaborative approach to developing and implementing the International Patient Summary. And we think that it's going to result in high value, a more robust set of artifacts, and far greater success. So we're going to highlight this collaboration. So my name is Mike Nusbaum, and it's my pleasure to join with Rob Hausam to present to you today. I come from the IHE world. I'm also involved in several other standards organizations, and I've had the great honor to be the co-chair of the IHE IPS profile development group that was very much cross SDOs, cross standard development organization. It was a great collaboration of SDOs. Rob comes from the HL7 side of the house, but he's also involved in many important activities, both inside and outside HL7. And we were very fortunate to also have Rob as part of this cross SDO development team that produced the IHE IPS profile. So together we're going to present to you all about the International Patient Summary. Let's begin by remembering that IPS is really there to fulfill a clinical need. So what is that need? The need is really to have an up-to-date clinical summary, a relevant clinical summary, available at any point of care, be that anywhere in the world. That is a very lofty goal, and we think we've managed to provide a great stepping stone to fulfill that need. So how do we achieve that need? Well, we're all about standards here. So of course, we set out to build a standardized set of clinical content that can be effectively utilized by any clinician anywhere in the world. So that's, again, another lofty goal, but we've managed to achieve quite a bit of success, and it's become a very important topic in our discussions. Once we have that standardized set of data, content, and a foundation to build it on, we want to make sure that this is properly tested and verified, that the content can be sent from one place to another, and received and understood as it was intended. And of course, for those of you that are deeply involved with the IHE Connectathon, that's one of the venues where we can do that testing and verification. Of course, it's all about adoption and implementation. So again, a tested and verified solution using standardized artifacts can then be adopted into vendor products that you can buy. And that's really our ultimate goal, is to get these things working, to get the IPS actually doing work, helping with workflow, and in fact, helping to improve healthcare and the health of the population. Of course, the job is not done once we've implemented. It needs to be maintained, and it needs to grow to learn from from implementations that happened early on, and then move forward to improve and help better fulfill the need. And in a collaborative world, that becomes a little bit more complex, as you can imagine. We'll cover that in a moment. So let's first of all just get on the same page on what is the IPS. So first of all, obviously it's international. It's a solution that has global application beyond any particular region or country. Interestingly enough, those that have been looking at the IPS also think that it is very useful domestically, that is within a country or within a region. And isn't that a nice unintended benefit? But that will help the IPS gain acceptance around the world. And then of course it is a patient summary, so we must all understand what a patient summary is. It's an extract of the health record. It is not the health record, but is an extract in a point in time. It's comprised of a standardized collection of both clinical and contextual information. It looks in the past, it looks today, and it looks in the future. And it's, again, it's a snapshot in time of a subject of care's health information and activities that they're undergoing in the healthcare system. Together, the International Patient Summary then brings all that together. Now, this has been an interesting journey that started well over a decade ago. In fact, in 2009, there was a lot of activity, especially in Europe, when the European Union came together and decided to come up with a cohesive international environment. They started investigating how patient information could move around within countries and between countries. And there were a myriad of projects, some of which are listed on this slide. In the lower left corner, you might recognize projects like EPSOS. Of course, Europeans that are listening to this will probably have a good understanding of how this has evolved within Europe itself. And that carried on for a number of years, many years actually, but around 2017, the Joint Initiative Council was first made aware of the activities that had been going on in patient summary. And the Joint Initiative Council is a collaboration in itself of 9 international digital health standards development organizations, or SDOs, and they're all listed there. These are the major players in our industry. The JIC, as we call it, has been in place for some time and looks at opportunities for collaboration whenever possible. So of course, the European representatives, both from CEN, which is the European Standards Agency, and many others, started talking about the patient summary work that had been going on in Europe and started to make the JIC, and in fact the rest of the world, more aware of perhaps an evolving need to come up with something that was international in scope. The JIC undertook to do a project itself to help define some guidance around a patient summary standard set. We took a look at the industry. We did a real deep dive into what was in place and where the gaps might be, and published in 2018 a paper that's available still on the Joint Initiative Council website. It's a very good and comprehensive baseline document. And around the same time, in around 2017, began the journey for the International Patient Summary. It started with a collaboration between the United States and the European Union, and it quickly evolved. HL7 and CEN began it. These are 2 of the SDOs. And again, that quickly evolved to a group of 5 SDOs currently that are now all part of this ecosystem. So those SDOs are listed there. CEN and ISO, especially their Technical Committee 215, Health Informatics, work very closely together in promoting European standards to the international realm. And so the specifications are now part of ISO as well. HL7, of course, has been very active in building the foundational documents and implementation guides for the IPS. IHE came into this a couple of years ago, hoping to assist in the implementation side and develop the IPS profile. And of course, SNOMED International, which provides that terminology that we need, has made available great artifacts that have been useful and in fact essential to the success of IPS. So it is now very much a cross SDO initiative. Other SDOs are very much interested in participating, and this group is very open to participation from across the standards development organization world. So in order to help understand how IPS might be used in healthcare, we have a very short video that we'd like to play. It was put together by a colleague of ours, Derek Ritz, and it explains in 200 seconds or less what the IPS is and how it's used.
This bite-sized video describes a potential global health role for the International Patient Summary in 200 seconds or less. My name is Derek Ritz. So what is the IPS? An International Patient Summary document is an electronic health record extract containing essential health information about a subject of care. The original work on the IPS was started by the European Standards Organization, CEN, to satisfy EU directives related to supporting unplanned cross-border care. The foundational CEN work has since been built upon by ISO, SNOMED, HL7, and IHE. The new IHE profile, for example, also supports planned care within a national care delivery network. This last use case represents a bread-and-butter workflow that happens all day, everywhere. As an essential part of delivering high-quality, cost-effective, patient-safe care, we need to identify the patient, fetch the patient's health story, provide evidence-based, guideline-adherent care, and update the patient's longitudinal health record to reflect the results of the care encounter. Alongside companion specifications for ID management and computable care guidelines, the IHE IPS profile plays an essential role in supporting this key workflow. In 2018, the U.S. National Institute of Medicine published a report called Crossing the Global Quality Chasm. According to the analyses in the IOM report, improving care quality in low and middle income countries could save between 5.7 and 8.4 million lives per year. This is a big deal, and WHO is doubling down on digital health as a way to help get it done. Over the coming years, WHO plans to co-publish all of its more than 50 care guidelines as computable guidelines. The global guidelines can then be adopted and adapted by countries to operationalize person-centric, evidence-based care within their national care delivery networks. The coded person-centric health data can be aggregated to generate health system management indicators. These indicators can help the countries more effectively operate their care delivery networks. But that's not all. These data can also be de-identified and employed to support machine learning analyses that reveal new care innovations. As these innovations are incorporated into the guidelines, we start to see the benefits of a learning health system. If these de-identified data are shared with WHO, we can operationalize continuous improvement on a global scale. So there it is. Coded person-centric data, such as we have in the IPS, is essential to improving care quality and to building a global learning health system.
Hi, I'm Rob, and Mike has just explained the promise and the nature of the IPS and some of most of the actors and activities involved, and that's been highlighted by the excellent video from Derek. And now I'd like to drill in a little bit deeper into the standard itself and some of the details of how we're developing and maintaining it. And so Mike has already mentioned that we're talking about IPS as a patient summary. It's a focus summary, and it's intended to provide a healthcare summary for a citizen at the point of care. It's also intended to be minimal and non-exhaustive. And by that, we mean that it doesn't have all of the data. It has enough data, though, to be useful. It's specially agnostic, meaning it's not tied to any particular type of medical practice or practitioner or any specific medical condition, but it's intended to have the data that we need to provide, that's clinically relevant for the care that you may need, particularly in an unfamiliar situation. Next slide. Next slide. And the design philosophy is it's intended to be simple and implementable, usable at any time and in any place by anyone. And there are multiple beneficiaries. There's individuals and, of course, healthcare providers and society as a whole. Next slide. So what makes up the IPS? It's oriented as it's a document paradigm. That's a document, though, that's composed of reusable profiles. So the document has sections, including as you see, the allergies, problems, medications, vaccinations, results, procedures, and so forth. But those are usable as also a library of profiles. So it sort of has the best of both worlds. It has a cohesiveness to it that can be, put together as one entity and exchanged and at a single point in time, but it can also be used, the parts of it can be reused and used together and for different types of activities. So next slide. So if we look at the library approach, we can take something like particularly the IPS immunization profile and use that to record individual vaccinations and basically have what would be the equivalent of the WHO yellow card. That's going to be hopefully the foundation of some of our new digital vaccination certificate efforts through WHO and others. Next slide. And so I'll describe now a little bit about the content of what's actually in the IPS. It's broken up into a number of sections, As you see on the left, the header sections, you've got things that talk about what's the subject, the author, the attester, the custodian. That's similar to the CDA header if you're familiar with that. And then there's a set of required sections, so the big three sections. You've got medications, allergies, and your problem list. Those are the things that basically are always important for any clinical care setting. Beyond that, there is a set of recommended sections, which include immunizations, procedures, medical devices, and diagnostic test results. I expect that there may be some push to make immunizations even maybe a required section rather than recommended, given the times that we're living in right now and what we're expecting in the near future with the COVID-19 vaccination rollouts. But and that's again part of the evolution of the specification. But in addition to those, we also have a set of optional sections, which you can see there, and you can include data on a number of other important things, including pregnancy and various social history and care plans and so forth. And there's also some additional flexibility where IPS can accommodate data that's not necessarily explicitly designed for, but it's left as open to be able to accommodate future needs and additional needs that an individual might have. Next slide. And so in order to develop and implement the IPS, the important point is that we have a number of organizations working on this, and we're working together, as Mike has already said. And so you see again, CEN and ISO, and they have developed the standards for the data elements that are included in IPS. And down below that, you see SNOMED also for the terminology, and it includes specifically the IPS free set, which is part of the global patient set from SNOMED, providing some free terminology content that can be used anywhere, which is very important for global implementation of IPS. And so we really appreciate their efforts on that. And then we move over to the implementation standards, which are based on the HL7 implementation guides for IPS in both FHIR and CDA. And building on top of that is the IHE IPS profile. And then for European implementation, the CEN standard for that as well. And then that leads us to how we determine when we've implemented the standard, how we're assessing our ability to do that accurately and completely and assess conformity with the standards. And that's where the connectathons come in, particularly with IHE, upcoming connectathons there, and the HL7 FHIR connectathons. So we all do testing, and that helps us to further get some feedback on how implementations are and continue to use that data to further develop and improve the standards. Next slide. And so this gives a little more detail on where we are with each of those artifacts in the standards. And I'm very happy to be able to report that as of actually just today, the ISO Draft International Standard 27269 is no longer awaiting approval, but it actually has been approved. And so now it's entering into the phase of final editing and publication. So that's another important milestone, and it was even late breaking after we finished putting the slides together here. So that's more excellent news. We're moving forward. And we also have the publications of the CEN standards, as mentioned, and HL7 has published both the FHIR and CDA implementation guides as standard for trial use, meaning they are ready for use, but they're still in development and they'll still be improved as we get feedback and implementations through connectathons and through real world implementations. We want to continue to improve and develop and make them more and more useful. And we have and IHE also has the profile in a trial implementation state. And then SNOMED already mentioned about the global patient set, which does include the IPS free set content. So the next slide. All right, and so for fostering our implementation and our adoption of IPS, there are a number of initiatives that are working specifically in that area. And one of the key ones is part of the Global Digital Health Partnership, the GDHP. In the interoperability work stream, there's an IPS work group, which is being led by the US ONC. And we have 31 countries and also WHO participating. And we've set some fairly lofty goals for that, to have hopefully 10 countries implementing IPS in some type of at least a pilot project by the end of this year, 2021, and then continuing on with that into next year. By the end of next year, the goal has been the target to have 20 countries having some level of implementation of IPS, with at least 10 of those in some type of production use. So that's what we're targeting and shooting for and trying to work to achieve. And other organizations are involved in this as well, including the Global Consortium for eHealth Interoperability. And it's composed of HL7, IHE, and HIMSS, and they're also working to promote the IPS specification. Next slide. And in order to help keep things coordinated and maintained as we are continuing to work on the standards, and we have lots of moving parts and lots of people who are interested, and we've developed some groups to help kind of keep that in line and aligned, I should say, and as we maintain. And there's an HL7 IPS group, which is actually responsible for the continuing maintenance and development of the standard. And we have published the initial FHIR implementation guide for IPS back in May of 2020. And we're targeting May of this year to publish an update to the standard for trial use with some additional corrections and additions that we have found over our experience in the last year. So we're working on that actively, and that should be coming out in the next few months. And in order to work across all of these groups, as Mike has already mentioned, we also have developed a cross-SDO collaboration group, which includes representation from HL7, IHE, ISO, SNOMED, and other groups. And we're meeting bi-weekly. We're focusing on the maintenance and alignment and progressing the further development and implementation of all of the IPS specifications. And so I think this is we're going to turn over to Mike now and to finish and wrap up our session.
Thanks, Rob. Great overview. And what I think a point we want to make is how successful this whole collaborative environment has been and how it might be able to be used for other initiatives beyond IPS. So we'd like to just list a few learnings from our experience over the last couple of years. So let me start out by saying cross-SDO collaborations end up working extremely well when there's a focused need. And I've been in the standards business for decades, and I've never seen this level of collaboration. You should be aware that when as Rob described the IPS, we're all talking about the same standard. We're finding different artifacts to help support that standard and help it be implemented, but it's the same standard. And so that requires a lot of collaboration. And in these collaborations, each standards development organization has unique expertise and unique tooling and processes, and these all are brought to the table and mesh together so that we take the best of the best and develop the artifacts and the guidance that the user actually needs to implement and make use of the IPS. So what we have at the end of the day is a suite of artifacts. We've talked about those, they've been listed, and there will be more. But they are designed to work together and ultimately help the implementer, help the user that needs to have the IPS at their fingertips so they can conduct their business. As Rob mentioned, the development job doesn't end, it grows and needs to be maintained. And as HL7 is doing work to do revisions, so are all of the other SDOs. So it's really important that we all keep in sync, that we all understand how the IPS specification and implementation artifacts are growing, and that we all stay in lockstep in order to keep all of our artifacts relevant. And adoption and implementation, we found, can be improved by leveraging collaborations that already exist internationally. So I've already mentioned the Joint Initiative Council, and Rob mentioned the Global Consortium and the Global Digital Health Partnership. These are multi-stakeholder organizations, all of which have adopted and supported the development of IPS and promoted it. And we're very, very pleased to see that IHE and IHE North America has done so as well. And we look forward to the day where we can come to an IHE Connect-a-thon, both in North America or Europe or Japan or Korea, and we see vendors testing IPS with other vendors. That is what we are hoping to see very, very quickly. And we're just at the very beginnings of that, but there's a lot of interest. So watch for that, because if you are a vendor and you'd like to test IPS, there are many opportunities to plug in both in the IHE realm and also in the HL7 realm and elsewhere as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you for being an audience and for helping to, for being interested in IPS. We hope we've given you information that is useful to you. Of course, both Rob and I are very, very pleased to represent quite a larger group of stakeholders that have come together for a couple of years now. We're all getting to know each other quite well, but Rob and I can be an entry point if you're interested in learning more. There's our contact information. And we hope to be able to talk again about the success of IPS implementation around the world. Thank you for your attention.